I travel often and extensively, originally hailing from Chicago. As you might know, Chicago is a major hub in the Midwest, often emphasized by our local leaders due to its strategic location. This advantage allows for easy travel to nearby states like Indiana, Michigan, and farther off to places like New York and California, which I frequent. It's not that we're living large, but often these wild tours turn out cheaper than luxury stays in places like Las Vegas. I usually drive across the U.S., starting from Chicago and heading towards the sunny Californian coast. This lets me explore various states, shop, and finally relax at seaside resorts. In short, it's fantastic. So, we often set out in a small convoy of 4 cars, cruising joyfully along the highways. That was the plan in August 2013. 3 cars, 7 of us. Normally we stick together, but this time in Colorado, 1 car with 3 of our friends veered off. Emily and Chris, a married couple aged 28 and 32, along with Emily's 19-year-old brother Tyler, who was on his first trip with us, decided to stop in some obscure town, reputed for its unique local cuisine. That's where we split up. The thing is, we usually take different routes to keep the journey interesting and fresh, but deviating 250 miles into the Colorado wilderness for some supposedly fantastic local food seemed unwise to us. It's not like there were Michelin stars on offer. Consequently, as we planned to head into Utah, they turned towards Colorado. We also found their detour impractical because our route back was supposed to go through Colorado and then Kansas. It would have been easy to explore on our return, but sometimes the spirit of adventure takes precedence. We agreed to keep in touch via cell and meet in Lake Tahoe, where we planned to stay for 3 days. Everything went sideways by evening when Emily stopped replying to my texts, and soon my messages weren't even delivering to her phone. Chris's phone was out of reach too, and I didn't have Tyler's number since we weren't well acquainted. However, my husband recalled that his friend Jake in the second car had it. After explaining the situation, he tried to reach Tyler. When all 3 phones were unreachable, we knew something was wrong. We halted and decided to drive to Colorado. We spent the night in a town near the Rockies, and by morning drove into the small town they aimed for, only to find it was just a tiny mountain village. Nobody there had seen any tourists from Chicago. We followed the route our friends were supposed to take to the next town, but found no trace of them. The police listened to our bewildering story and agreed to help. The last known location from their phones was 50 miles from any settlement or known road, in rugged terrain. A day later, Chris's car was found abandoned on the outskirts of a valley, off any recognizable road. 2 hours after that, we found Tyler in a ruined, abandoned cabin. Here's what he shared, in my own words. Things started off fine. We followed the GPS, roads were clear, and travel was smooth. The first hiccup came when the GPS led us astray. We checked Google Maps, realized the mistake, and found a detour through a nearby valley that seemed straightforward. The road was unpaved and abandoned, which wasn't surprising given the sparse population. We expected to reach a main road within an hour. However, by 9:30 p.m., with no sign of the highway and the landscape unchanging, we grew worried. The GPS stopped updating, and we lost cell service. We drove a bit further and spotted some houses. With no tech to rely on, we decided to ask for directions. It was dark, but one house had a faint light. As we approached, a woman outside quickly turned and walked inside without acknowledging us. Perplexed but needing directions, we knocked on the next house's door, which eerily opened on its own. Inside, everything seemed decades out of date. We entered a kitchen lit only by candlelight, finding no modern amenities, just a wood stove and primitive furnishings. Hearing voices, we approached the only other room, where a family dressed in antiquated clothing sat around a table. They didn't notice us until Chris tapped one man's shoulder. Suddenly, their expressions changed, eyes turning white, skin darkening ominously. They then stood up, staring blankly at us, and advanced. Panicking, we fled back to the kitchen, but the door slammed shut, extinguishing the candle and plunging us into darkness. I managed to break a window and escape, only to find the landscape utterly transformed. Where buildings once stood, there was now only a meadow under a starlit sky. I passed the door, which was a couple of steps away from me, and when I was in the kitchen, I heard a terrible slamming of the door behind me. The candle immediately went out, plunging the kitchen into darkness. I turned around and tried to open the door, but it wouldn't open, so I rushed outside, intending to call for help, but I was frozen to the ground. I couldn't see a single house around me. I saw nothing at all. In the place of half a dozen buildings was a meadow, and the August wind was blowing. No buildings, no fences, nothing. Dazed and half-crazed, I rushed back into the house. At first, I thought my legs would refuse to carry me into that frightening house, but this unknown void, unthinkable and unfathomable, turned out to be scarier even than that devilish family. Emily and Chris were there, and I had to let them out. As I burst into the familiar dark kitchen, I pounded on the door, calling for my sister and Chris, my arms and shoulders bloodied, trying to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The most horrible thing was that from the moment the interior door slammed shut, I had not heard a single sound, no screams, no banging on the door, no sounds of scuffling or fighting. This cosmic silence was more frightening than the most deafening, soul-tearing scream. Realizing that I couldn't handle the door, I decided to break the window and get in, or rather, get the guys out through it. I stumbled around the house and ran to the window, but there was no glass or anything to replace it. The aperture of the window was a black eye socket. The dim glow was gone, only darkness. I pulled myself up and climbed in, not without difficulty. My mind went completely blank. There was no longer a table, no longer the door I'd been breaking through a moment ago, my hands bleeding. I walked on wobbly legs to the doorway, which was no longer closed, and saw the moonlight streaming into the meadow, illuminating the landscape well. I darted back into the room, still calling for Emily and Chris. My temples were pounding and I was shivering. Above my head, the stars were shining low and bright. I could see them because the roof was gone. It had failed almost completely. I didn't understand at all what was happening. My brain just refused to believe in the reality of what was happening. Like a little kid, I ran and called out until my voice broke. Then I cried. I sat huddled in a corner and cried. Then I blacked out and woke up when I was brought to my senses by the police. The search for Emily and Chris turned up nothing. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Local lore suggested that a village once existed there, known for mysterious disappearances and rumored dark rituals, but had vanished centuries ago. The local watchman there told us the following story. There are no settlements in those parts now, it's true. But there was a village there, almost 2 centuries ago. They lived there in isolation. Strange and secretive people, only 17 households. They were all pagans or something, so not many people were friends with them. And what friendship if they wouldn't let anyone in? They never came to any neighboring village to ask for marriage. They had no division into relatives. They married brother and sister. There were many rumors about them, about god-awful rituals, about sacrificial animals they stole from the surrounding villages, and about human sacrifices. There were cases of people disappearing. Whether they did or didn't, you'll never know. Only once a village disappeared. A local resident noticed that 2 sheep were missing and suspected pagans of stealing them. This had sometimes happened before, so they gathered a few men and armed themselves and went to deal with the thieves. When they arrived, the village was gone. No houses, no people, not even a trace, as if nothing had ever been there. One would have thought that they had come to the wrong place, but only one house stood in its place. They go inside, and there's nobody there. The table was set, food on plates, but no one was there. They searched everything from the cellar to the attic. Nothing. They came back, conferred, and decided never to go to those places again, considering it a curse. The news spread. The police and many people from the city came, but they could not find any explanation. An abandoned house has stood there ever since. The local watchman there told us the following story. There are no settlements in those parts now, it's true. But there was a village there, almost 2 centuries ago. They lived there in isolation. Strange and secretive people, only 17 households. They were all pagans or something, so not many people were friends with them. And what friendship, if they wouldn't let anyone in? They never came to any neighboring village to ask for marriage. They had no division into relatives. They married brother and sister. There were many rumors about them, about god-awful rituals, about sacrificial animals they stole from the surrounding villages, and about human sacrifices. There were cases of people disappearing. Whether they did or didn't, you'll never know. Only once a village disappeared. A local resident noticed that 2 sheep were missing and suspected pagans of stealing them. This had sometimes happened before, so they gathered a few men and armed themselves and went to deal with the thieves. When they arrived, the village was gone. No houses, no people, not even a trace, as if nothing had ever been there. One would have thought that they had come to the wrong place, but only one house stood in its place. They go inside and there's nobody there. The table was set, food on plates, but no one was there. They searched everything from the cellar to the attic, nothing. They came back, conferred, and decided never to go to those places again, considering it a curse. The news spread. The police and many people from the city came, but they could not find any explanation. An abandoned house has stood there ever since. The police, puzzled and with no evidence of foul play, suggested they may have left voluntarily. I saw Tyler. He wasn't lying. He had gone from a healthy 19-year-old to a wasted, frightened, and broken man who hardly sleeps and is on antidepressants. I don't know how that can happen or what it was, but the inexplicable, sticky fear I felt at the place where that house stands, I still feel now, 2 years later.